What actually kills a Rolex? Water, magnets, or heat? It is none of those, but what you are doing. Most Rolex owners do things to their watches and never think to check it twice. And because nothing happens for years, they don't know they are destroying their watches. By the time they do, the damage is already done. So, what are these things you should never do to your watch? Watch on to find out. 15. The crown left half screwed. Make sure the crown is fully screwed down before wearing or swimming. That line is in the manual of every modern Rolex, and almost nobody reads it twice. The trap is simple. A screw-down crown feels secure the moment it's pushed in, even when it hasn't turned that last quarter turn to lock. You wind the watch in the morning, push the crown back toward the case, feel a click, and walk out the door. It looks closed. It isn't closed. And the gap between those two states is the entire seal. Owners wash their hands, do the dishes, get caught in the rain, jump in a pool, and nothing happens 99 times out of 100 because the stem seal buys a little grace on its own. Then one day, it doesn't. Water finds its way past the threads, fogs the crystal from the inside, and by the time the fog is visible, moisture has already reached the movement. Rolex's own service centers see this constantly. A piece walks in looking spotless on the outside, and the technician pulls the case back to find a light film of rust already creeping across the bridges underneath. Fixing corrosion like that usually means a full movement rebuild, several $1,000s on a watch that a half turn of the wrist would have protected for free. We get why the mistake happens anyway. Screwing the crown down is the least dramatic step in owning a Rolex, and habits tend to form around the dramatic parts, not the quiet ones. Nobody remembers to double-check a motion that takes half a second and produces no visible reward for doing it right. Have you ever caught your crown unscrewed? This mistake is invisible until it isn't. The next one is the opposite kind of trap, a rule people believe is protecting them when the protection already wore out years ago. 14. Trusting water resistance is forever. Somewhere out there is an owner who hasn't gotten his Submariner wet in a decade because he's terrified of losing the seal. And somewhere else is an owner who dove with his 15-year-old Datejust because it's a Rolex, it's rated for it. Both of them are wrong, just in opposite directions. Water resistance isn't a fixed number stamped once and true forever. It's mechanical, not decorative. And it depends entirely on rubber. Gaskets around the crown tube, the caseback, and the crystal lose elasticity as they age, the same way a rubber band left in a drawer eventually stops snapping back. Heat, cold, and time all work against them slowly. Without leaving a single mark, you can actually see from the outside. Even a watch that never touches a pool isn't safe from this. Ordinary humidity and everyday swings between an air-conditioned office and summer heat stress, the same seals from the inside. So a piece that's never been swimming can still fail a pressure test. Service shops that specialize in pressure testing report the same pattern, watch after watch. Caseback leaks are rare, crystal leaks are rare, and crown leaks are the default failure point. Because the crown is the one part an owner actually touches every day. A watch can be spotless, recently serviced, and cosmetically perfect and still fail a pressure test that same week, because none of that has anything to do with rubber that's simply run out of stretch. There's a reason Rolex service centers don't publicize how often watches come back with water already inside them. It's not embarrassment for Rolex. It's embarrassment for the owner who assumed a rating printed on a dial meant a guarantee for the wrist underneath it. An annual pressure test costs a small fraction of what a corroded movement costs to rebuild, and it takes less time than getting a haircut. Most owners skip it anyway, year after year, because nothing looks broken until the exact moment it is, and by then, the fix is a different order of expensive entirely. Nothing looks broken. Hold on to that phrase, because it's going to matter again before this list is over. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. 13. Sizing the bracelet yourself. Picture a kitchen table, a $5 jewelry toolkit off the internet, and a brand new Datejust with a bracelet 2 links too long for a first-time buyer who doesn't want to wait for an appointment. It looks simple in a video. Push out the pin, pull the link, push the pin back in, done. In practice, the pins on a Rolex bracelet are precision fit, and one slip of a cheap tool can scratch the case, gouge the clasp, or send a spring pin flying across the room, never to be found again. Watchmakers who work Rolex service counters describe a familiar sight walking through the door, a bracelet missing its half link, patched with the wrong link, pulled from an entirely different reference because the owner didn't realize they aren't interchangeable between models. So the watch goes back to the counter anyway, except now the story has changed. And here's the part that stings later, once the watch is up for sale. Buyers checking a used Rolex look at bracelet condition the way a mechanic checks under a car before agreeing on a price. Mismatched link finishing, a scratched clasp, or a missing micro-adjustment piece drops the offer before the seller even finishes explaining what happened to it. The 5-minute job at home turns into a service center visit anyway, except now it's a repair instead of a simple fitting. An authorized dealer sizes a bracelet at the counter, free, in less time than it takes to find the right screwdriver in a junk drawer. The toolkit that promised to save an afternoon usually costs one instead. Bad tools ruin a bracelet slowly, over months. The next mistake ruins timekeeping instantly, and most owners never even notice it's happening to them. 12. Ignoring the magnets everywhere. Your Rolex was 3 minutes ahead this morning. Yesterday it was perfect. You didn't drop it. You didn't bump it. And nothing about your routine changed. Except maybe you set your phone on the nightstand next to it, the way you do every single night, right next to its wireless charger. Modern smartphones carry magnets for their cases and their wireless chargers. So do laptop speakers, handbag clasps, and the magnetic closures built into plenty of watch boxes. A mechanical movement's hairspring is thin enough that a nearby magnetic field can pull its coils together, shortening the spring's effective length and speeding the watch up, sometimes by whole minutes a day, instead of the odd second here or there. The fix is almost embarrassingly small. A jeweler can demagnetize a watch in under a minute with a handheld tool that costs about $20. And it's the same kind of quick counter service a Rolex boutique routinely handles for walk-ins on minor issues. No drama, no long wait. But owners rarely think to ask, because a watch running fast doesn't look broken. It just sounds wrong, the way a slightly off song sounds wrong before you can explain exactly why. Rolex actually solved this decades ago with the Milgauss, a watch built with an internal shield strong enough to withstand 1,000 Gauss, specifically so scientists working near strong magnetic fields wouldn't run into this problem. Everyone who doesn't own one is still carrying the vulnerability around in a pocket, next to a phone, without a second thought. There's a simple home test worth knowing before any of this becomes a real problem. Bring a compass slowly toward the watch. A needle that swings and follows the case means the movement has picked up a charge somewhere along the way. A needle that stays put means the watch is clean, and whatever's making it run fast has a different, less common cause worth a proper look from a watchmaker instead. A phone on a nightstand is one kind of danger. A tennis court is a completely different one, and it swings a lot harder. 11. Wearing it somewhere it was never meant to go. Golf, tennis, weightlifting, a pickup basketball game with friends. Plenty of owners wear the watch through all of it, because a Rolex is marketed as tough, and toughness practically invites being tested. The truth is more specific than tough. Rolex builds its cases to survive shock and vibration inside a defined range, not to absorb a full-force swing transmitted straight through the wrist bone into the case. A golf swing sends a jolt through the arm that can knock a movement's balance wheel out of true, even when the case shows zero damage on the outside afterward. A tennis serve does something similar, again and again, one match at a time. Weightlifting adds a different risk entirely, the bar or a dumbbell meeting the case directly, chipping a ceramic bezel that can't be buffed back out, because ceramic doesn't polish the way steel does. Owners who play through a full round or a full match with the watch on sometimes notice nothing at the time and only catch a timing drift days or weeks later, at which point connecting it back to a single swing or serve is nearly impossible. The damage and the discovery end up separated by enough time that most owners never make the connection at all, and the watch just quietly needs a service they didn't see coming. We understand the instinct not to take it off. Removing it feels like admitting the watch isn't as strong as the marketing promised it would be. But the marketing was selling a lifestyle, not a stress test. And the difference between those two things is exactly what shows up later on a service invoice nobody wanted to pay. A cheap rubber strap for game day costs less than a single ceramic bezel replacement, and it protects the exact same watch, far better than Pride does. Do you take your Rolex off for sports, or keep it on? That damage came from force. The next one comes from something with no force at all, just quiet chemistry doing its work over time. 10. Skipping the rinse, after chlorine or salt. A pool day ends. The watch comes off, and it goes straight into a drawer without a rinse. Nobody thinks twice about it, because the watch survived the swim just fine and kept running perfectly. Chlorine is the quiet troublemaker here. It attacks rubber gaskets faster than fresh water does, drying them out and shortening the interval before they need replacing. And over repeated exposure, it can dull the finish on a steel bracelet in ways that are hard to reverse afterward. Salt water is worse for a different reason entirely. As it dries, it leaves crystallized salt packed into every crevice of a bracelet's links, and that salt works like sandpaper against the metal every single time the bracelet flexes on the wrist during a normal day of typing, driving, and reaching for things. A rinse under the tap costs 30 seconds. Owners who skip it aren't being careless on purpose. They're just moving on with the rest of the day, the way anyone would after a swim, towel in hand, kids to chase, bags to pack. The cost shows up 18 months later at a service counter as gaskets replaced sooner than they should have needed to be, and a bracelet with a finish that looks tired for a watch this young. Chlorine works slowly, over seasons. What's coming next can warp a dial in one single afternoon. 9. The sauna, the hot tub, and the car dashboard. There's a specific kind of heat that a Rolex was never built to sit inside for long. The kind that arrives with a sudden temperature swing attached to it. A hot tub or sauna does two things at once. It heats the metal case, which expands slightly faster than the gasket seal around it, and it surrounds the watch with steam that's actively hunting for any gap that opens up in that moment. A watch left on a car dashboard in direct sun does something quieter, but just as damaging over time. Heat that can climb past 140 degrees Fahrenheit inside a parked car in summer, enough to soften luminous paint, warp certain dial finishes, and stress the same gaskets from the outside instead of from the inside. Cold works the opposite side of the same problem. A watch worn skiing all day, then plunged straight into a hot car heater, forces those seals through a swing they were never designed to absorb in minutes. None of this looks dramatic while it's happening. The watch keeps ticking, the hands keep moving, and there's no alarm bell built into the case to warn anyone in the moment. But because temperature swings and water exposure attack the exact same rubber seals from two different directions, a dashboard nap in July and a hot tub session in December end up doing more or less the same job on those gaskets. They just take different amounts of time to finish it. Lume plates are the visible casualty owners notice first. A dial baked on a dashboard for a full summer can develop a faint yellow tint across the luminous markers that wasn't there the year before. A slow chemical change that no amount of cleaning reverses. By the time an owner notices the color shift, the same heat has usually already been working on the gaskets for months, out of sight, doing the part of the damage nobody photographs for a forum post. Heat and water attack the seals from outside. This next one skips the seals completely and goes straight for the case itself. 8. Opening the case back yourself. Somewhere on the internet is advice claiming you can open a Rolex case back with a rubber ball, pressed hard against the metal and twisted counterclockwise. It works, sometimes, in the narrow sense that the case does eventually pop open. What it doesn't tell you is what happens after. A caseback forced open with the wrong tool almost never seals the same way twice. The gasket gets pinched, torn, or simply doesn't seat flush anymore, and water resistance quietly disappears from that point forward, whether or not anyone notices right away. Owners who try this to swap a strap, peek at the movement, or just satisfy some curiosity are without realizing it, trading a sealed watch for an unsealed one in exchange for 5 minutes of looking inside. An authorized dealer opens a case back with a specific tool shaped to grip the exact notches Rolex machines into the case, applies the correct torque by feel and by spec, and reseals it afterward with a fresh gasket every time. That service exists, and it costs very little relative to the watch sitting on the wrist. The rubber ball trick is free right up until the pressure test fails and the bill for the fix arrives, usually bigger than the curiosity was worth. That mistake damages the watch on purpose, chasing curiosity. The next one damages it while actually trying to help. 7. Polishing it until the edges disappear. A watch that looks brand new sounds like a compliment. To a collector evaluating what to pay for it, it's closer to a warning sign than a selling point. Polishing removes a thin layer of metal to erase scratches, and done sparingly by someone who understands the original case geometry, it can be nearly invisible. Done aggressively, or done repeatedly over the years by whoever happened to be behind the jewelry counter that day, it rounds off the sharp bevels on the lugs, softens the crown guards until they look like they're mid-melt, and pushes the lug holes outward until they're no longer centered where the factory placed them. None of that comes back afterward. Once the metal is gone, it's gone. The same way you can't sand a table back to its original shape once you've taken off too much wood. Most owners get this backward. They polish before selling, thinking a shinier case means more money in the offer. Serious buyers do the opposite math in their heads. An untouched case with a little honest wear tells them the watch's history is what the seller says it is, while a case polished to a mirror finish makes them wonder what's being covered up, and they price their offer accordingly, sometimes hundreds of dollars lower for the exact same reference. Honestly, I go back and forth on this one myself, because a scratched-up watch bothers plenty of owners far more than a slightly rounded lug ever would in person. But the market has made its preference clear over and over again, sale after sale, and it isn't the shiny one. Once a case has been thinned past a certain point, no amount of regret buys the original edges back. Polishing damages a watch on purpose, chasing a look. What's coming up next damages it while wearing a stranger's name badge. 6. Letting the wrong hands touch it. Not every watchmaker who advertises Rolex repair online has actually opened one before. Some have plenty of real experience behind them. Others haven't. Not really. And the watch can't tell the difference until something quietly goes wrong months later. An uncertified shop working on a Rolex might use generic parts that fit close enough to pass a glance, but aren't built to Rolex's actual tolerances, might use the wrong lubricant entirely for that specific movement, or might simply not have access to the specialized tools the case and crown require to be resealed properly. None of that shows up immediately at pickup. It shows up 18 months later as timekeeping that's slightly inconsistent, or 2 years later when an authorized dealer finally opens the case for a routine service and finds parts inside that don't match the reference on paper at all, a mainspring or a rotor built for something else entirely. This one matters more than most owners realize once resale enters the picture. A watch serviced outside Rolex's own network, with mismatched parts sitting inside it, can lose meaningful value even when it looks flawless from the outside, because a knowledgeable buyer checks under the hood before agreeing to any price. The money saved at the cheaper shop rarely covers what gets quietly subtracted later at the negotiating table. There's also a quieter cost that has nothing to do with resale. A movement built to Rolex's tolerances is regulated as one complete system, every part machined to work with every other part. Swap in a part that's close but not exact, and the watch can still run, still look fine on the wrist, and still lose accuracy in ways a cheap shop has no way to properly diagnose because they never had the reference specs to compare against in the first place. The watch keeps working. It just stops working the way it was built to. Wrong hands are one problem, and they leave a trail behind. No hands at all, for years at a stretch, is the next one, and it leaves no trail whatsoever. 5. It still runs fine. So why service it? Somewhere, there's a Rolex that hasn't been opened in 15 years, running within a few seconds a day. and its owner truly believes that accuracy is proof nothing could possibly be wrong inside. Lubricant inside a movement doesn't fail all at once. It thickens slowly, then dries out completely in specific spots first. And a watch can keep beautiful time for years, while wear quietly builds between metal parts that are no longer gliding on oil the way they were designed to. Two gears meshing without proper lubrication don't announce themselves with a grinding noise the way a car engine might. They just wear a fraction of a millimeter at a time in total silence for years. By the time the watch actually starts running poorly enough to notice, the damage is often already done. And what would have been a routine, affordable service turns into a full movement rebuild at several times the original cost of just staying on schedule in the first place. Watchmakers who see this pattern across hundreds of movements describe it the same way. The watches that come in worst aren't the ones that broke down. They're the ones that never complained at all, right up until they stopped completely, usually with no warning and no obvious cause. The recommended interval sits at approximately 10 years for a Rolex under normal wear, per Rolex's own guidance, though daily wear or a heavy-use lifestyle can shorten that in practice. Almost nobody actually hits it, because it still runs fine. Feels like all the evidence anyone could possibly need. It isn't. It's just the last thing to fail, not the first thing to quietly wear out. And by the time it fails, the bill has already grown several times over. Owners treat the absence of a problem as proof of health, when, for a mechanical movement, silence is exactly what wear sounds like on its way in. Neglect happens on the inside, where nobody can see it happening. What's next happens right on the wrist, in plain sight, and owners still manage to miss it. 4. Wearing the bracelet loose. There's a specific look plenty of owners chase on purpose. The bracelet worn a touch loose, sliding slightly with every gesture of the wrist, because it photographs well and feels less restrictive than a snug fit against the skin. It also wears out faster, and by a meaningful margin. Every bit of extra play means the links rub against each other and against the clasp with more freedom to move, and that friction is exactly what thins the metal between the pinholes over years of ordinary daily motion. A bracelet worn snug barely moves at all against itself, so it barely wears at all either. A bracelet worn loose is grinding itself down every single day it's on the wrist, just slowly enough that nobody notices until the links start to feel visibly stretched and sloppy against the clasp. Rolex actually engineered around this exact problem, with its Oyster Lock and Glide Lock safety clasps, which are designed to keep a properly fitted bracelet from opening by accident. But a clasp can only protect a bracelet that's adjusted correctly in the first place, and a loose fit undermines the whole system it was built to work inside. There's a safety cost too, and it's the one owners actually end up regretting the most. A loose bracelet is a bracelet that can catch on a door frame, a car seatbelt buckle, or a gym rack without much warning, and the watch that survived a swimming pool and a golf swing gets knocked clean off the wrist by something as small and mundane as reaching for a bag on an overhead shelf. Snug, loose, or somewhere in between. How do you wear yours? That's where you can watch coming for months. The next mistake stays completely invisible until the exact day you try to sell. 3. Throwing away the box and papers. A watch box looks like packaging, the kind you toss out with the tissue paper the day after Christmas. To the resale market, it's closer to a birth certificate than trash. The warranty card, the outer and inner boxes, the service booklet. None of it makes the watch run 1 second better, and plenty of owners toss all of it within a year, because it's just taking up drawer space they'd rather use for something else. Then 5 years later, they go to sell, and the first question every serious buyer asks is whether the set is complete. A Rolex missing its box and papers typically sells for somewhere between 10 and 30% less than an identical watch with a full set. Not because the watch itself is worth less, but because the paperwork is part of what buyers are actually paying for: proof, provenance, and a little less risk sitting on their end of the deal. Rolex will not reissue a lost warranty card under any circumstances, not even to the original owner standing there with a receipt in hand. Once it's gone, that specific document is gone permanently, and no amount of explaining, "I bought it new, I promise, brings it back into existence. A service card from an authorized dealer can soften the blow later, but it was never meant to replace the original paperwork, only to stand in for it after the fact. The math is more concrete than most owners expect. On a watch worth $10,000, a missing set can mean the difference between a sale at $9,000 and a sale at $7,000, purely because the buyer has to price in the uncertainty the paperwork would have removed. Multiply that gap across a whole collection built over a decade, and a habit as small as tossing a cardboard box adds up to real money left on the table, one sale at a time. Somewhere out there is a first-time buyer who saved for 2 years, finally walked out of the boutique with his first Datejust, and threw the green box in the garage because it took up too much room on the shelf. He doesn't know yet what that box will cost him the day he finally decides to sell. Losing paperwork costs you later, quietly. The next mistake costs someone else, right at the moment of purchase, in real time. 2. Chasing a deal from a stranger. Every collector has a story that starts the same way, a price that seemed too good to pass up, from a seller who seemed trustworthy enough in the moment, over a few text messages and one grainy photo. Gray market and private party Rolexes aren't automatically fake, and plenty of honest sellers move watches this way every single day without incident. But skipping an authorized dealer or a vetted reseller means skipping the one thing that actually protects a buyer: verified history. No confirmation the watch hasn't already been in the water and quietly dried out by someone hoping it would be fine on its own. No confirmation the movement inside actually matches the reference stamped on the caseback. No confirmation the bracelet links are original instead of swapped in from a cheaper reference just to make a set look complete for the sale photos. A 10% discount on a watch feels like a win the day you hand over the cash. It feels like something else entirely. The day a service center opens the case and tells you the movement isn't the one that's supposed to be there, or the day you go to sell it yourself and a buyer's inspection turns up water damage. Nobody ever disclosed to you either. The deal was never actually a deal. It was a risk, wearing a price tag instead of a warning label, and the discount was the label's disguise. None of this means every private sale is a trap. Buyers with a long, verifiable history on a trusted forum, dozens of confirmed transactions behind them, and a willingness to answer questions before the money moves are a different category entirely from an anonymous listing with one blurry photo and a price that doesn't match anywhere else on the market. The rule collectors repeat to each other for a reason: buy the seller, not just the watch, because the watch alone can't tell you where it's been. Every mistake on this list has its own separate cause. But there's one thing sitting underneath all 14 of them, and it's the reason none of them get caught in time. 1. Believing the watch doesn't need you. Rolex spent decades building a reputation for toughness so effective that it quietly became its own liability. Owners here built for Everest and raided to the ocean floor and translate that, without meaning to, into doesn't need looking after, which was never actually what any of that marketing meant to say. Remember the watchmaker's drawer from the very start of this list, the one full of pieces that flooded quietly over months without anyone noticing. Every watch in that drawer belonged to someone who believed exactly this. Not one of them thought they were being careless in the moment. They thought they owned something that couldn't be hurt, and that belief is precisely what let the damage happen, completely unwatched. For months at a time, 1/4 turn of a crown away from being prevented. The watch is well built, that part is true, and it's the reason a Rolex can survive more than a dozen different kinds of neglect and still keep ticking through most of them without complaint. But can survive neglect and was designed for neglect are two different sentences entirely, and the space between them is where every single mistake on this list actually lives and quietly does its damage, year after year, unnoticed. Durability was never a substitute for attention. It was only ever a longer runway before the lack of attention finally caught up. A tool still needs the person holding it to pay attention. That isn't a flaw in the watch. It's the whole point of owning something built this well in the first place, not to stop thinking about it, but to finally have something on the wrist worth thinking about at all. The watches that get handed down, sold at a premium decades later, or worn for 40 years without a single expensive surprise, don't belong to owners who got lucky. They belong to owners who kept paying attention long after the newness wore off. So, which of these things have you done and are still doing? Let me know in the comments. Like this video and subscribe.